Portland? Let's try that again. What's up, Portland? All right, let's party. So my name's Ken Wheeler, Ken_Wheeler on Twitter. You guys should all take out your phones, open them up, and go to that right now and follow it. Not a lot of JavaScript, but you won't regret it. I'm the director of open source at a fine company called Formidable. We're a consultancy in Seattle where we do magical things with JavaScript. And I want you guys to take a real hard look at this right here. Because this is the future, and actually the current, of how a lot of your clients and consumers are going to be consuming your apps. Right? Mobile usage has surpassed desktop usage. And desktop usage has declined 20%. 68% of US adults have smartphones and 50% own a tablet. It's to the point where, I think a lot of these people in this room, you grew up, you had typing lessons, you used, Mavis Beacon typing with the bugs on the windshield. It was awesome, right? I asked my niece the other day, I'm like, did they still teach you guys typing? And she was like, no, these kids don't even type. The teachers encourage hunt and pecking, right? So it's to the point where, a lot of us probably got computer literate from downloading Kazaa and trying to get some, that sort of thing. But, these kids these days don't have to do, they don't have to install drivers to steal music, So, it's super mobile centric. And, I think that anytime I'm referencing the web in this talk moving forward, let's keep in mind that I'm referencing it in the mobile context, right? So what's awesome about phones? There's a lot, actually. Namely, that they're portable, okay? This is a computer. Back in my day, the computer was in my mom's laundry room, and I'd go up there and she'd pick up the phone, and I'd get disconnected from the internet, and it was devastating. I was hanging out writing Visual Basic, punters on AOL. It was amazing. And, but now these kids, and us, we're walking around. We have computers, legit computers in our pockets, and these devices can do all kinds of things, right? They have cameras built in, GPS built in, motion tracking, speech recognition, touch, what have you. It's all built into the phone, so it's a remarkable device with remarkable capabilities, right? But unfortunately, the web has already lost on mobile devices, no matter what anyone tells you about this. So let's look at this graph. Who doesn't like a good graph and stats? So 90% of time on mobile is spent in apps, as opposed to 10% in browser. That looks crazy, right? Based upon, I know a lot of you probably do a lot of browsing throughout the day, but that looks like an interesting figure, right? So I don't think that's actually completely true, right? It might be 10% in the actual browser itself. However, most of these apps these days have a browser built right into them, right? Things like Facebook, Twitter, they're aggregating content. They're not aggregating web apps. They're aggregating static content, 10 reasons you won't believe this happened, what have you. So, that's how you're getting to that. But, it's not bringing you to apps. So, maybe a more genuine statement would be that web apps have already lost on mobile devices. All right? So let's talk a little bit about the state of the mobile web. So the mobile web's problem, right? First off, performance, right? I don't care what anybody says. Generally speaking, it feels shitty. You're gonna have some like the 3 top engineers at Google put together an app and be like, doesn't feel shitty, but it's like, yeah, it does, most of the time. And even if it did feel pretty smooth, there's also capabilities, right? You have a device with all this, magical, mystical, electronic, gadgets built into it, and you don't have as much access or, as integrated or smooth access as you necessarily would through a mobile app. And it's just not really suited for application development, no matter how much we try, right? So why does it suck so bad? I'll tell you. But first, we got to look at a little bit of web history, right? So this fine, handsome son bee right here is Tim Berners-Lee, right? This guy created the internet. He created the first browser and HTML in 1990 at CERN, right? And I just learned this is actually an interesting fact. The browser was literally called the World Wide Web. I thought the World Wide Web was like the thing, but the actual browser that he created to view it was called the World Wide Web. I thought that was kind of fascinating, so I included it as a bullet point. But it was created to share research documents. What we are building apps on today was created to share research documents. It's like making enterprise applications as Microsoft Word, Visual Basic snippets or something. It's ridiculous. It was never intended for applications. Then this guy comes along who actually, I don't know if he called me awful, but he called the conversation about the app browser thing awful. Whatever, Brennan, I love you, buddy. So he comes along and invents JavaScript, right? And now suddenly, right, these documents, right, you can click on these PDFs and gee whiz, what do we do then? So you have open source tools that came out, things like Dojo, jQuery, and MooTools, right, in the 2006 area. And these came out to simplify scripting because, A, browser APIs are a little bit rough, and still are today, and they're also super fragmented. Not so much today, but back then, Jesus. Another thing is widgets, right? When you're building on the web, right, there's an interesting thing that happens, and that's you have document primitives. If you're putting together a Microsoft Word document, sure, there's a tag for all that. But if you're building an application, right, user interface, you really kind of got to just build this hilariously out of divs and spans because these widget primitives don't exist in the browser. So that's what these libraries came along to do. They give you things like date picker, calendar widgets, and things like that, other things that make regular apps usable, but are not somehow first class built into the web. But I digress. And people start making web apps, right? So it got noticed, and boy, oh boy, HTML5 came along, and wow. It introduced app-centric features, right? You started to get some higher-end widgetry, right? You got video and audio, right? You got browser APIs, things like drag and drop, canvas, geolocation, web audio, right? Now we can play around a little bit, right? So, yeah, it's time to build some real deal apps, right? Showtime, we got some little bit of app features. Yeah, no. This is a quote from Mark Zuckerberg. The biggest mistake we made as a company was betting too much on HTML5 as opposed to native. It just wasn't ready. It turns out good enough wasn't good enough, right? It's a lipstick on a pig, so to say. If it's not, if your foundation is not where it needs to be, you can add a video tag, but it's not going to make it a suitable application platform. Which brings us to the present day. And some of the challenges that we face are things like our web apps load slowly, right? Our bundles are too large. Why are they too large? It's because we have to have dozens of libraries, right, that essentially build our widgetry and make platform features usable out of toothpicks and glue, right? So you have hundreds of thousands of kilobytes of code to do things that really should just be built in. I mean, it's like simple things like dates. Like, give me a break. And gesture recognition. And specifically in the mobile arena, it does not have enough access to the device APIs. These are incredible machines people are carrying around in their pockets, and we are not exploiting them to the full potential, in my opinion at least. Right? So enter progressive web apps. Sorry. So what are progressive web apps? So they are apps that follow a Google-specified set of performance recommendations, right? And I quote, "A progressive web app uses modern web capabilities to deliver an app-like user experience." And they're supposed to look and feel like an app. Don't get me wrong. Before anything else, I just want to say that PWAs are great, right? No, seriously. I think with the current set of conditions that we're working in, right? The web's not going to change overnight. So like right now, with what we're working with, if you're going to, realistically, they're not adding anything new. It's just a performance checklist, right? So it's like saying don't make a PWA is like saying, hey, make a shitty website. It's like, I'm not going to tell you to do that, right? It's it's something you should be doing. I had a very long talk with Alex Russell personally, and he knows. He knows. And, they're trying. They really are trying. But, just one company, a lot of different companies have to come together. What have you. PWAs are a good thing. However, I'll tell you what's wrong with them right now. I'm not saying you shouldn't do them, but in no way, shape, or form do they feel native. They just don't. And don't let anybody tell you that because they're lying to you or they sell PWAs for a living. They're dealing with platform limitations by imposing restrictions, right? So instead of saying, hey, we have a problem here, maybe we could fix it. And don't get me wrong, they're working on fixing it. But, they're saying, all right, listen, the problem's there. If you want your stuff to run right, hey, scale it back, chief. And, that's essentially what's happening here. There's no new feature. It's like a, set of recommendations so that your stuff doesn't explode. And most of the spec, most of the cooler parts of it only works on half of phones. I mean, half a phone. I mean, that's not like a solid metric. I don't know how many people have iPhones versus Android, but, everybody who has an iPhone, it doesn't work. So, they don't replace native apps. And that's one of the things that's concerning because you see the hype, the PWA craze out there right now. Everybody's going for this PWA thing. And, don't get me wrong, definitely a noble thing to do. However, you shouldn't try and replace a native app with a PWA. I mean, again, don't get me wrong, it depends on what you're building, but it's not a suitable replacement for an app most of the time. And, you're going to get Zuckerberged. Simple as that. So what I'm here today to talk about is we need an app browser. And this is something I feel pretty strongly about. If you have seen me on Twitter, you've probably heard a lot of this, and this is just the long-form argument. Right? So one of the first things people ask is, why don't we just build native apps and then keep the browser for static sites, right? Forget trying to build apps in the browser. Well, native apps aren't without their set of problems too, right? You guys, this is a React Native conference. Everybody's done some native appery. One of the things that frustrates me about native apps coming from the web is discovery is rough, right? If you make an app, it's a little bit difficult to then get that app noticed. Also, distribution, that's half the reason React Native exists. The distribution is so rough. But the experience is outstanding. Right? It really feels good, and a lot of people do prefer the apps. I see some people say they prefer the website, but a lot of them sell PWAs for a living. Then you hop over to web apps, right? The discovery is outstanding. You have search engines, and you can find whatever you want, and instantly, right? Don't get me wrong, there's rankings, but you can find it. Distribution is free and open. Are you kidding me? With now.sh, I could push a website out, and I could do it right now from my terminal in 3 seconds. It'd be adorable. That's how easy distribution is. However, the experience is a little meh, I mean, for the app, right? I mean, if you're making a blog, whatever, the web's fine. But, if you're making an app, right? So my position here is why not both? Why can't we have both of these things? Why can't we take the best of both worlds, right? An app browser, right? A browser that uses URLs, right? And if you go to a regular website, you want to go to BuzzFeed to see, 10 reasons why you're going to hate Ken Wheeler. It'll load it up. It's no problem. But if you go to a site that's native enabled, you're good to go. It'll just load up a native app. The big thing is can't change the web overnight. And it's you don't really need to change the web overnight. You could just open a different thing when it's the native thing. It doesn't, you can leave HTML as is, and let's just fork. It's IOJS this thing. Another thing is, wouldn't we need a cross-platform API bridge to native? Right? So people have different phones, things like that. And how, from the web, or even with JavaScript, how can we make it work on both things, right? It's funny, it exists. Have you guys heard of this? It's crazy. It's like this library where you can write JavaScript and it works on all the phones. It's crazy. Right? So how would you go about building this app browser? This app browser that I speak of? I will show you because I built that shit. Okay, so long story short, I built an app browser. You guys see here, right? You go there. You can go to regular websites, right? This is just a browser, it's just a web view and stuff. It goes to, You can check out what's going on in the country. Or you can go to a native enabled site and you open it up. Boom, Kenstagram. It's like Instagram, but it's way better because it's just my pictures. You can come over here, you can pause on this picture of my wife's butt, and you go up here, and the camera works, and if you can even go back to the web if you want to, right? So really, I'll tell you how it works. So it works like a regular browser, like any other browser. In fact, it's like my daily driver browser. I use this browser like I would Safari on my iPhone. It has back, forward, and you put in a URL. It also like maintains history and has like a type head URL sort of thing. So like, you know, you start typing like, you know, CNN.com and it'll come up. And then if you load up a native enabled one, right, it'll just load something different, right? But on the web, it's just a web view. It's funny if we want to get into the technicalities of React Native conference. Let's talk about this for a second. It's WK web view, right? Whereas the regular UI web view actually is the older way to do that. WK web view, an open source package I used to build this, actually gave me the progress, which was a really important thing for me. I'm a weirdo like that, so I needed the progress on the site. So I needed real-time progress feedback, so I used WK web view. But yeah, it's just a web view. The whole thing's written in React Native. How it works, part 2, right? So it'll load HTML. If it is a native enabled site, it'll load the React Native app, right? And I'm gonna get into how that works. So the bundle URL that you would normally see in like your app delegate gets sent to the web view via post message from the web page, right? The browser gets that, and it's like peace out web view, and then it loads up the app bundle and mounts it using a root view component, right? So if you have like your RCT root view where your regular React Native would mount up, that's where that gets loaded, right? And this is just kind of an example of the code that you would use to do that. I just check if web hits in the window, and then I say, hey, do you want to open the native enhanced app? And they're like, yeah. And then I send post message, and you know, it's kind of like Reduxy, or at least I've just used Redux so much that this like API pattern is like burnt into my skull. So I'm like, type bundle data, whatever the bundle URL is, and you send that, and then the browser uses that to load that up and mount it. Right? But you know, every time I talk about this, you know, a lot of like the Stockholm Syndrome browser people, they're like, yeah, well, what about the web? What's going to happen on the web? You know, what about browsers? Don't support that. What are you trying to kill the HTML? And no, that's not what I'm trying to do at all. Like, if a browser doesn't support it, right? I have a thing that I like to call regressive enhancement. Right? It's sort of like progressive enhancement, but the other way around, right? So you fall back to the web using React Native Web. You can alias React Native to React Native Web, and then any differences, like where like maybe the web doesn't cut the mustard or, you know, provide those kind of APIs, you can use like .web.js extensions, or you can use environment variables to be like, hey, we're dealing with this little browser here. Camera's not going to work. And I'll show you how this works now, right? You saw Kenstagram, that award-winning application that everyone's downloading these days. Here it is in regular Safari. That's shiny. You should go on that. It's right on my America clothes. But yeah, it loads up, and it's you know, it's just alias to the HTML, and it's regular HTML React app bridged, and then you click the add a photo, and it does this adorable thing where it's like, system camera. But yeah, you know, so it's completely possible to have, you know, these native apps load, and then, you know, you're not duplicating effort, because really you're just polyfilling native for the web. You're just making native the first-class citizen, which isn't super weird because everyone's like saying mobile first on web anyway. You know, it's not entirely unreasonable, and it clearly works. So deal with it. So what do I have to do moving forward, right? You know, this is kind of a hard thing to build, so I'm kind of like, it's like in progress. Right? This is the first of many talks here about this. So the main thing is bridging the communication for URL syncing and routing. I think it's an interesting paradigm to have apps work off of URLs and maintain a URL state. So if you could imagine apps that, you know, instead of kind of just like this like internal navigation state with pops and everything like that, kind of had like URLs, you know, like deep linking, but, you know, like a little bit more visible to the user. That's one thing I want to set up. Handling local assets, right, which is kind of tough. I mean, I'm sending the bundle URL, but I'm not really sending local assets. I mean, you could host them on the remote server, but I digress. Handling individual permissions for these apps, and a standard library. That's a big one for me. Again, one of the biggest things with the web is you have to kind of recreate everything. You have to be real clever about everything. And if we're going to start again and do something new, I think it's super important that we have a standard library of sorts of useful things. And that way, you know, if we have legitimate dates, we have legitimate widgets, right? We have way smaller bundles, right? There's not all these different libraries trying to, you know, backfill inefficiencies in, you know, what we're doing. So the standard library is huge. Don't worry about that. So when's it getting released? Probably not. Do you think this guy would let that through the store? And are you nuts? No, I'm kind of building it as like a proof of concept to kind of just show that it can be done. But the good news is that this sort of exists now, right? And it's from a lovely company called Expo Real, bang up group of folks. If you haven't used Expo, use Expo. Like now, get it downloaded on your phone immediately. You know, it doesn't necessarily do the whole web portion of this, but when you try and build an app browser and you start to run into this sort of problems from, you know, doing an app browser, and you're familiar with Expo, you're like, oh wow, that's why Expo did that. Holy shit, they're so smart, they figured that out, because there actually is a lot of problems when you're trying to build it, and they've done a really good job of doing that. And you know, probably doing it in this web browser format might get them kicked out of the App Store, so I get it, but you guys really should use this. It's phenomenal, right? It runs the apps. It supports URLs. You can click a URL in social and it'll open it up right there. It has a standard library. You know, it has their own libraries, which is phenomenal. If you haven't seen XGL, you know, they have GL completely ported over. You can make like 3D games. It's ridiculous. Somebody made Crossy Road. I was like, you serious, dude? And the workflow and experience is absolutely superb. It's probably the best I've ever worked with in my life. I mean, your like download to on the phone working application it's ridiculous. So yeah, this is just me trying to start this discussion here today. And if we take anything away from this, you know, I'm not a JavaScript guy. I'm not a web guy. You know, I'm just some dude in a tank top. But you know, at the end of the day, I mean, my job is to provide our clients and our clients' customers with a better experience. And if we want to provide them with a better experience, we're going to need a better web. Thank you.